guys, we'll make a start.
So sorry for a little bit of delay there. Just been doing a little bit more printing, so I've been reminded about this summary sheet, which is good. So in today's lesson, we are going to summarise what we've been doing this term leading up to our last test. And so this test is on chapter 8 and 9, and the unit specifically is continuous random variables. Okay, that's what CRV stands for. So you remember in chapter 7, we're looking at discrete variables. All right, so that has to be strictly whole number values, whereas continuous occurs over an interval. All right, so we'll follow along with what I've written up here. We'll follow along with the summary sheet I've presented there as well. So most of chapter 8 we'd sort of done before, from 8C down, but chapter 8B was new, where we talked about probability density functions. So you've got the information there about the criteria required for a valid probability density function. Two things you need to remember: has to be above the x-axis because probabilities are positive, and the sum of the area under the curve has to equal 1 over the interval for which it's valid. So that's in 8B. And then in 8B2 we look at the characteristics of it. So we've got mean, median, mode, standard deviation and variance and so forth. I just want to talk very quickly about the median. Okay, because when we did the median, we did a manual process for it, and I showed you how using integration we can come up with the solution. But you can also input that into your calculator, and many of you have been doing that with your wine glass folios. So if you're not sure how to put that in equation solver in your calculator, please let me know and I'll talk you through it. But I think most of us have sort of done it at some point with the wine glass folio. So moving on, we get to 8C. We've been doing normal distribution since year 10. 8D, the only extension is we do it with our calculator. Just remember, when you're performing this in the test, please write down the syntax that you're putting in your calculator so I can see what your thought pattern is, what you're thinking about. 8E, we have the standard normal distribution, the Z distribution. All right, so mean of 0, standard deviation of 1, and its use, comparing different distributions. 8F, quantiles. So what are quantiles? Here's K. What's the value of K? So the area is 0.1, all right, on a distribution. Okay, so that was chapter 8, and most of that we had seen before from 8C downwards, whereas A and B were sort of new to us. Then we get on to 9A, so chapter 9, and here we're talking about sampling distributions. So that's the distribution that arises when we add observations together, SM, and then we had distribution of sample means, XM, that's when we average distributions, we average observations. Then in 9C, we consolidate both of those with the central limit theorem. Okay, central limit theorem. The thing to remember from there is that as n increases, normality increases, right? So if you have larger n, the distribution becomes more concentrated about the mean. In 9D, we learn about confidence intervals for means. So we looked at the 95% confidence interval, but beware, there are other values of confidence intervals. In 9D2, we have the formula for n, calculating how large n needs to be to justify a certain level of confidence. And in 9F3, we're testing confidence claims. In 9E, we introduce you to the idea of a proportion. So that's a segment of a population that has some characteristic that we're investigating. And then in 9F, we looked at confidence intervals for proportions. We tested claims and we had another n formula. So that's a good summary of all the things that we're working through. So I had 2 comments I wanted to make. I had 3, but I can't remember the third one. I can remember 2 of them. When it comes to me, I'll tell you. So the first one is the equation solver. The second one is rounding on confidence intervals. Okay? So there's 2 ways you can do it. All right, and you might notice in the solutions for the tests, let's come up with a couple of confidence intervals. 0.415, so let's do one for a p-value, 0.422. Yeah, that's okay. That's legitimate. All right, so let's say we put it in our calculator, and this is what came out, and it says to round to 2 decimal places. All right, so if you're going to do normal rounding, what you would do is you would round this to 0.42 and you'd round this to 0.42 as well. All right, that would be normal rounding. Okay, so let's not consider the context that, that's not a boundary and so forth. Let's just say that's how you would round it normally. Okay, and that's fine. You're very welcome to do it. That's the way I've taught you to do it. If you look at the work solutions in the tests, they always round the bottom boundary down and the upper boundary up in order to guarantee that confidence width. Okay, so if you were to do the other procedure that I've just stated, where we round the bottom one down, so that would become 0.410, and the upper one up, it would become 0.430. Alright, so even though 2 would normally stay as is, if we round the top end up and the bottom end down, this would be the confidence interval that we generate. Okay, now either of those processes is fine. You get marked the same for both. I've confirmed that with SACE, so I'd probably be more inclined just to stick to that. But beware when you do encounter the confidence interval questions in the tests, in the work solutions, saying, what's he doing with this rounding? That's a bit strange. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing it to justify the level of confidence that we're stating. Okay, so those were two of the things. I'll think of the third one soon. All right, as far as revision goes, we've got lots of tests and we've got lots of time. It's Wednesday next week, right? Maybe that was the third thing I was going to say. The test is Wednesday next week. So we've got 4 revision lessons, 3 this week and 2 the next week. We've got 5 revision lessons. Okay, so we've got all those tests to work through. I've printed these 3 for you today. If at any stage, I'll probably ask you guys a bit later in the week who wants the 17, 18, let me know. We've got the review sets, and I do have more resources as well, right? I've got stuff from other schools, so if you want to, let me know, but the only issue is sometimes they order the topics a little bit differently, okay? So they might combine some integration with this and so forth. All right, so that's a summary of revision materials, and then for the tests, so Wednesday next week, 1 A4 page of handwritten notes, bring your graphics calculator, and you'll notice in the textbook, sometimes they ask some binomial questions that they integrate them together. They have a normal distribution part and then a binomial part at the end. You're not being tested on anything from chapter 7, it is just chapter 8 and 9, all right? But in the exam, they will do that kind of thing, bring them all together. Okay. I reckon that's it. Test, I haven't written it yet, but it'll be about 60, 70 minutes because it is 2 chapters. So it'll be a little bit longer than we have for the last few. And yeah, cool. Any questions? All right, so let's get into it. If you've still